None of this happened. No person, no company, no event you're about to see is real.
There is a spending decision that two completely different kinds of people make in exactly the same way. One of them has very little money. The other has a great deal of it. One of them is called cheap by the people around them. The other is called smart. But when the moment arrives, when the price tag is in front of them and the decision is being made, they arrive at the same answer through the same logic. And somewhere in the middle of those two people is everyone else. Spending in ways that feel justified but leave nothing behind. Saving in ways that feel responsible but build nothing forward. Living in a financial space that has a name most people never hear spoken directly. The middle is where money disappears without drama and without trace. Understanding why the two ends of the spectrum make the same call and why the middle rarely does is one of the most practically useful things a person can learn about money, because it changes the question being asked before every spending decision. Not, how much does this cost, but what is this money actually doing? And that is a completely different question with a completely different kind of answer. This is not a video about being frugal. It is not a video about spending less. It is a video about understanding what the spending is actually doing. Because that understanding, once it exists, changes every financial decision that follows it.
Lena was 28, and she spent money the way most people her age spent money. Not recklessly, not without thought. She just spent it on things that felt good in the moment, and most things felt good in the moment. A dinner out with friends because the week had been hard and she deserved it. A new jacket because the season had changed and the old one felt tired. A trip booked impulsively on a Thursday night because the price looked right and the pictures looked better. Each of these decisions had a reason attached to it. The reasons were always present, ready, convincing, emotionally true. And because the reasons were true, the spending felt justified. Not extravagant, not irresponsible, just living. But Lena's account at the end of every month told a quieter story. The number moved downward with a regularity that had nothing to do with emergencies. It moved because every emotional truth in her week had a price attached to it, and she was paying all of them. Lena was not spending money, she was converting money into feelings, relief, reward, excitement, belonging. These are real things, they have genuine value, but they do not compound, they do not grow, they do not show up years later having quietly multiplied. They arrive, they are felt, and then they are gone, and the money that bought them is gone too. There is a term for what Lena was doing, though it rarely gets used in financial conversations. It is called consumption spending. Money exchanged for something that is used up, an experience, a feeling, a moment of comfort. The thing purchased exists only in the consuming of it. And then there is a different category, money that is exchanged for something that continues to exist after the purchase, something that holds value, something that generates value, something that works independently of the person who bought it. This is not a moral distinction, it is a mechanical one. Quietly wealthy people and genuinely careful people, the ones who are careful for the right reasons, both have an instinctive preference for the second category, not because they deny themselves pleasure, but because they have developed an almost automatic awareness of which category a purchase belongs to. Before the money moves, a question has already been answered. Will this exist after I consume it? Will this be worth more tomorrow than it is today? Will this produce something, financially or practically, beyond the moment of purchase? If the answer is no, the threshold for spending becomes higher. Not impossible, not forbidden, just higher, just considered. And that difference in threshold, applied consistently across thousands of small decisions every year, is what separates two financial lives that start from the same point. Marcus was 41, and he spent money without visible hesitation.
good restaurants, quality materials, comfortable travel. The people around him assumed a high salary, and they were right. But the salary was not what made the spending look different. What made it look different was what Marcus never spent money on. He did not own a new car. He had driven the same one for 9 years. He did not upgrade his phone on a cycle. He upgraded it when it stopped working properly. He did not buy things to signal his income. His income was not in need of a signal. Marcus had, at some point in his 30s, stopped making spending decisions based on what something cost. He had started making them based on what something returned. A meal at a good restaurant returned connection, conversation, memory. He valued those things genuinely, and he paid for them without guilt. A new car every 3 years returned a feeling, a signal, a performance of success. He did not value that, so he did not pay for it. Marcus was not cheap. He was precise. The distinction is important. Cheap means avoiding cost. Precise means choosing return. One is driven by scarcity. The other is driven by clarity. And those two things produce completely different financial lives, even when the decision looks identical from the outside. The car that never gets upgraded, the phone used until it stops working. From the outside, this looks like scarcity. From the inside, it is strategy. Every dollar not spent performing is a dollar available to compound quietly somewhere else. Priya saved 40% of her income. She had done this for 6 years. By any conventional financial measure, she was doing everything right. But Priya was not building wealth. She was hoarding comfort. The money sat in a savings account, earning almost nothing. She knew this. She had read about investing. She had opened a brokerage account once and closed it 3 weeks later because the fluctuation made her anxious. So the money sat, safe, visible, and completely stationary. And Priya's daily life reflected the same logic. She avoided spending on anything that felt unnecessary, which over time had come to include most things. Not because she lacked the money, because spending felt like losing, like a number going down that should be going up. The result was a financial life that looked disciplined from the outside and felt joyless from the inside. The savings number was real, but it was doing nothing. And Priya, despite doing everything she had been told was responsible, was no closer to financial freedom than she had been 6 years earlier, because saving is not the destination. Saving is the fuel. And fuel sitting in a container that is never opened does not move anything. Priya had confused the act of not spending with the act of building. They are not the same thing. And the difference between them is exactly the distance between where she was and where she wanted to be. The middle, the space between Priya's hoarding and Marcus's precision, is where most people live. And it is the most expensive place on the financial spectrum to occupy. In the middle, spending happens without a clear framework. Sometimes it's emotional, like Lena. Sometimes it's restrictive, like Priya. Sometimes it's performative, spending to signal a financial position that does not actually exist yet. The middle is expensive because it produces the worst of both outcomes. Not enough spending to generate genuine quality of life, not enough saving and deploying to generate financial independence. Just a constant low-level negotiation between guilt and desire that exhausts the person managing it. The reason most people live in the middle is not laziness or ignorance. It's the absence of a framework, a clear, personal, non-negotiable answer to one question: what is this money actually for? Without that answer, every spending decision is made from scratch. Every purchase requires a fresh negotiation with guilt or desire or social pressure, and that negotiation is exhausting, and it is constant, and it rarely produces the right result. With that answer, with a clear framework for what money is for, the decision gets made once at the level of principle and then applied automatically to everything that follows. That is what Marcus has. That is what Ruth had. That is what Priya is missing despite doing everything else correctly. Not more money, a clearer answer to what the money is for. Owen was 32 when his financial life collapsed quietly and completely. Not from recklessness, from a sequence of reasonable decisions that added up to something unreasonable. A car that was slightly too expensive because he'd just been promoted and it felt appropriate. An apartment that was slightly too large because the neighborhood felt like where he should be. A lifestyle assembled from individually justifiable pieces that collectively cost more than he could sustain. When a redundancy arrived, sudden, poorly timed, and completely outside his control, Owen discovered something about his financial life that the good months had kept invisible. There was no floor. Everything had been converted into lifestyle. Nothing had been left beneath it. The months that followed were the most financially clarifying of his life. Not because losing money teaches wisdom automatically, but because necessity stripped every spending decision of its justification layer. There was no longer a story attached to each purchase. There was only the question, do I need this to function, or do I want this to feel something? Owen discovered in those months that a surprisingly large portion of his previous spending had been feeling-seeking, and the things he actually needed to live well cost considerably less than the things he had been buying to feel well. When Owen rebuilt, and he did, he kept the question, not as a restriction, as a filter. Do I need this to function, or do I want this to feel something? If the answer was the second one, he still sometimes said yes, but he said it deliberately, with the cost accounted for, with something left underneath. And that one change, that single question applied consistently, rebuilt his financial life into something the previous version had never been: stable, spacious, his.
So what is the decision that cheap people and wealthy people both make? It is not about the amount. The amount is irrelevant to the decision itself. It is about the return. Before the money moves, a question is answered, consciously or not. What comes back from this? The person with very little money and the person with a great deal of it both ask this question instinctively. The person with very little asks it because they cannot afford not to. Every dollar has to justify itself because there are so few of them. The person with a great deal asks it because they got there by asking it, and they have not stopped. The middle rarely asks it, because the middle is comfortable enough that money does not feel scarce enough to justify the question, and comfortable enough that the question feels unnecessary, even slightly unpleasant, like it would take the joy out of things. But the question does not take the joy out of things. It puts the joy in the right things. It separates the spending that genuinely enriches a life from the spending that simply fills a moment. And over years, that separation is the entire story. Not income, not discipline, not sacrifice. Just one question asked before the money moves, answered honestly. What comes back from this? There is a practical version of this that works at any income level. It does not require a spreadsheet or a budget or a financial plan. It requires 3 categories and the honesty to use them. The first category is building. Money that goes somewhere it grows. Investments, assets, anything that works without the person's presence. This comes first, before the spending begins. Non-negotiable, automatic, invisible. The second category is living. Money spent on things that genuinely improve the quality of daily life. Not the appearance of life, the actual texture of it. Good food, real rest, connection. The things a person would choose even if nobody was watching. The third category is performing. Money spent on things that signal rather than satisfy. The upgrade chosen because of how it looks from the outside. The purchase justified by what it communicates rather than what it delivers. The framework is not about eliminating the third category entirely. It is about seeing it clearly. About knowing, when the money moves, which category it is moving into. Because money spent performing is not money spent living. And money spent performing is definitely not money spent building. Wealthy people and careful people both keep the third category small. Not because they're the same kind of person, but because they have both, through completely different paths, arrived at the same understanding. That the performance is the most expensive thing on the menu, and it is the only thing that leaves nothing behind.
Kevin, had been sitting with all of this, and he had one honest question. If the framework is simple, if it is just 3 categories and 1 question, why does almost nobody use it? Because the 3rd category is invisible when you are inside it. Performance spending does not feel like performance from the inside. It feels like reward. It feels like self-expression. It feels like a reasonable response to a life well lived. The new car does not feel like a signal. It feels like something earned. The upgraded apartment does not feel like performance. It feels like finally living properly. And the advertising, the social environment, the financial culture around money, all of it is designed to keep performance spending feeling like living spending. Because if the 2 categories felt different from the inside, the 3rd one would collapse immediately. The entire architecture of consumption depends on the categories remaining invisible.
Making them visible requires only one thing: the habit of asking the question before the money moves, not after. Not as a punishment, not as a restriction, as a moment of honesty between a person and their own intentions. Lena is beginning to ask it, not every time, but more often than before. Priya is learning that saving without deploying is its own kind of avoidance. Owen has been asking it for 2 years, and his financial life looks nothing like it did at 32. Marcus has been asking it so long it no longer feels like a question. It is just how he thinks about money. That is the destination. Not a number, not a net worth, not a salary. A habit of thought that becomes so automatic it stops feeling like discipline and starts feeling like clarity.
Cheap people and wealthy people make the same decision for different reasons. One because scarcity demands it, one because clarity produces it. The goal is not to be cheap. Cheap is a response to fear. It restricts indiscriminately and builds nothing deliberately. It looks like the right answer and often produces the wrong life. The goal is to be precise, to know what the money is for before it moves, to keep the building category non-negotiable, to spend freely in the living category without guilt, and to see the performing category clearly, not to eliminate it, but to choose it consciously when it genuinely matters. The amount of income is almost secondary to this framework. Someone earning modestly and applying it clearly will build more over time than someone earning well and spending without one. Because the framework is not about restriction, it is about direction. Money without direction spends itself. It finds somewhere to go. It always does. The question is only whether the somewhere it found was chosen or simply happened. The same decision, 2 different journeys to it. And the space between those 2 journeys is where most financial lives are quietly won or quietly lost. If this reframed something that previously felt more complicated, subscribe, because every week on this channel, another one of these hidden patterns gets examined closely. And next time, we are going to look at why most people quit saving exactly when it starts working, and what is actually happening in that moment that nobody talks about.